Hi, my name's Cactus. Hopefully you'll see this before the video. So, we're going, I'm doing a Halloween themed video, and in this video we are going on a walking haunted tour. Now, a lot of the things in the tour are going to be very dark. You're not going to be able to see a whole lot, but you will hear, hopefully you will hear a lot. And the reason why you won't see a lot is because I didn't want to blind my tour guide with my bright light. So, hopefully you like the video. Hopefully you get to see a little bit more than I think you can see, but probably not. It's probably going to be like this. It's probably going to be dark. So, I hope you enjoy the video. My name's Cactus. Happy Halloween. Hi, too.
First thing I'm going to need from you guys, I need everybody to line up against the wall for me.
Why are we lining up against the wall? Yeah, alphabetical.
All right, so how's everybody doing tonight?
Doing great.
Come on, guys, there's a wall. Line up against the wall, Come on, you can do this. Have faith. A lot of wall here. This makes it easier for me to see everybody.
My wife went to the restroom, so she'll be right back.
All right. All right, folks, thank you for choosing a ghostly encounter tonight. We truly do appreciate that. Now, my name is Blanco. I'm going to be your guide for tonight. Before we get started, there's a couple of things that I need to go over, especially on a busy night like tonight. Safety is my number one concern. We are going to be crossing some streets. We're going to be going over some uneven ground. I need every single one of you to be aware of your surroundings. Now, if you are wearing open-toed shoes, please be double careful. About a week ago, I got to watch somebody's toenail peel off. I don't want to see that again. I'm okay with ghosts. I'm all right with the supernatural and the paranormal. I am not okay with watching nails peel off. It creeps me out. So please, hon, be very careful. Now, as far as the drivers in town go, you may not know this about the drivers in St. Augustine. Not a one of them know what they're doing. They most certainly are not going to be looking for us. So just because I'm crossing the street does not mean that it is safe. You guys are responsible for your own safety. Now, in the unfortunate event that one of you just don't make it, there is some fine print that nobody ever reads, because who reads fine print, right? The people that are with you is required to give me some personal information about the recently deceased. That way I can write a good story about it and have it ready by next week, all right? Always looking for new stories. Now, as far as me crossing the street, I'm kind of a crazy person. I will walk in front of cars because my life insurance pays double if I die on the job. I've got 3 kids, I love them dearly, and I want them to have a good life. So please be very vigilant tonight. Now, I do have a couple of rules. I hate this part because I don't like rules myself. Rule number 1, very, very simple. If I am talking, if I am in the middle of a story, please do not interrupt. Everybody here is paid for this tour, and I'm here to give you 100%. Do the best I can tonight. Rule number 2, also very, very simple. Keep up. If you cannot keep up with a fat pirate, I do not know what to say to you folks. Now, the final rule is not my rule, and it doesn't really affect you guys a whole lot. This is the rule specifically for me. We get heckled on these tours a lot. People like to drive by or they like to walk by and they will say the stupidest possible thing they can say. I am no longer allowed to heckle back anymore, because cussing people out and throwing things at moving vehicles is no longer acceptable in this country. This is the rule for me. This is not a rule for you. If we get heckled, I am all about free speech. I do not care what you say. Whatever comes to mind, have fun with it here. We're all here to have fun, right?
Yes.
Now, if you're worried about a confrontation, don't. There's 16 of us, and my sword is bigger than theirs. So I can't stress that enough. Say what you want. We're out to have a good time tonight. Now, I've got one question for you guys before we get started. Who here believes in the supernatural? All right. I got a few of you. The rest of you, I'm going to do my best tonight to change your mind, especially you. I've got something in mind for you. I got a weird vibe about that one. I'm going to do the best I can tonight to change your mind. I have a lot of luck on these tours. We get some crazy pictures. So I want all of you guys to have your cell phones out. I want you to take as many pictures as humanly possible. And when you get them home, put them on your computer and look at them in high def. We get pictures of orbs, apparitions, energy streams, and shadow walkers all the time. I will remind you after every stop, this is a good time to take some photos. I'll step back and I'll let you do your thing. Now, with that being said, I don't like wasting a lot of time. So let's go ahead and get this thing started.
We're going, guys.
I'd like to welcome you guys to Talamato. I like to joke around on these tours a lot. I like to have a lot of fun. This is one spot that I don't play around with. This is the oldest Catholic cemetery anywhere in the country. And before I start telling you any ghost stories about this place, I want you to know exactly what you're looking at. I want to give you guys some history. Because I honestly believe the history of this place is way scarier than any ghost story I could possibly tell you. Now, back before the Spanish arrived, they arrived here in 1695. Or, sorry, 1565. This was a native burial ground at that time. The Timucua Indians were the ones in control of this area. It was estimated there was about 350,000 of them in this area. Now, within 100 years, their population dropped down to nothing. Now, when the Spanish first arrived, part of their mission was to convert all of the natives to Catholicism. And they thought, what a better way to do this than take over their burial grounds and put a Catholic cemetery directly over the top of it. And then somebody had the bright idea, if we're going to do that, let's go ahead and name it Talamato. So Talamato was the current native chief in this area at that time. So that was a little insult to injury. Now, I know today you guys are going to look out here and this looks like a very small cemetery, but it wasn't always like this. Back before Henry Flagler showed up, this place was massive. This would have stretched from where we're standing all the way through the Cheesecake Company, through Potter's Wax Museum and the old drugstore over to Orange Street. It would have also stretched through this residence and the bed and breakfast on the corner all the way over to Saragossa and about 4 blocks straight back. So this was a big one. Now, when the Catholics took this over, they didn't bother to exhume the bodies of the natives. They simply built over the top. So we've got layers of bodies out here. We've got a layer of natives, and we've got a layer of Catholics on top of it, which to me is just as creepy as it gets. And it gets a little bit creepier than that, because when Henry Flagler showed up, he started buying up all the land he possibly could. And he did this at a couple of our cemeteries. He built homes, he built businesses right over the top of everybody. Just like the Spanish, he did not remove the bodies, he just built over them. And for this reason is why. If you have walked down our streets tonight, if you've been down our sidewalks, if you've been in any of the old buildings in town, at some point today, you have walked over the dead. That is just a fact of this city. That's why every inch of this place is known to be haunted. I feel like the city has a memory. Some of you are old enough to remember VHS. You guys remember what happened when you would record over a VHS tape? You'd always have that ghost in the background of whatever was there before. This city is no different than that. Some of the apparitions and some of the spirits that we see around here, I honest to God believe that they don't even know they're dead. I think they're still doing the exact same thing they did in life. And that happens a lot of times when somebody dies very, very suddenly. With all the war and plagues that this place has experienced, that happened a lot. Now, here at the Talamado, I'm going to jump around just a little bit. This was redone pretty recently. In fact, it was redone about 7 years ago. When St. Augustine was planning its great big celebration for its 450th birthday. The city went through a very large beautification process. They fixed up St. George Street. They did a lot of work to some of the historical buildings. They put lights up around the fort. They redid the old crypt back. They put up this new wall and these new fences. Part of that project were the new cemetery gates. Now, when they put these in, they made one mistake, and I have no idea why they've never fixed it. Every time I ask the city anything, they simply tell me to stop talking about it on my tours. And you guys are going to find something out about me tonight. I don't sugarcoat nothing. Good, look at this. See that cross? Anything weird about it? It's upside down. So what you guys are looking at here tonight is an ancient native burial ground with a Catholic cemetery built over the top of it, named after a native chief with an upside down cross over the top of the cemetery gates. This is our hot spot for apparitions. We get a lot of apparitions and we get a lot of shadow walkers here. Now, a couple of the more popular spirits that are seen here on a very regular basis. The first one I want to tell you about is a little boy. He died right here in this cemetery back in 1877. He was 5 years and 10 days old, and his name was James E. Morton. Now, James, his father had died in battle, and he had an older brother that was in charge of watching him constantly while his mother worked. I know to this day being a single mom is rough, but back then it would have been a lot worse. This one was working 2 and 3 jobs. They didn't have labor laws back then. She would work 18 to 20 hours a day sometimes, just trying to provide for her family. And so all the responsibility fell on Stephen, the older brother. This kid was only about 8 years old at this time. Does anybody here have younger siblings? Yeah? Did you have to watch them when you were growing up? Did you enjoy it? Absolutely not, right? I'm the oldest of 5. I got 4 little sisters. I had to watch them constantly. I hated my childhood. Stephen was no different than us. He got tired of watching James one day. So they came down here to the cemetery, which is a spot they used to hang out a lot. It's the closest thing to a park that these kids had. So they'd come out here and they would be playing hide and seek, tag, climbing trees, doing all the cool stuff the kids used to do before cell phones took over. On this particular day, Stephen wanted to go fishing with his best friend. Didn't want to take James with him. So when they came by here, Stephen, he kind of dared James. So I dare you to climb this tree. I'm talking about this big one right here behind him. In 1877, guys, this was a lot smaller than it is today. But for a 5-year-old, it was still quite a climb. James, wanting to impress his brother, started climbing the tree. Climbed right up here to where it was. He turned around, he looked at his older brother, and he asked a very dumb question. He said, "Is this high enough?" As an older sibling, he said, "Ever high enough?" Never. So he said, "No, keep going." So James started climbing again. This time he started climbing right up this branch here. Got up there to where it forked the second time. He turned around to ask Stephen the exact same question. But when he turned around to look at his brother, he saw him running away. Classic case of ditch. You ever get a chance to ditch your younger siblings? Yeah. It was fun, wasn't it? So he ditched James. The way we believe this went is James tried to climb down out of the tree to catch up with his brother. And when he did, he lost his footing. He fell out of the tree and he landed right over here, just off of the walkway, where he broke his neck. Now, Stephen went out fishing with his best friend. He had no idea this had happened. He was expecting his brother to be at home when he got there. But when he showed up, James wasn't there. But his mom was. And of course, you know what the mom said. "Where's your brother?" Stephen, being an honest kid, he told her, he said, "You know what? I don't know. I haven't seen him since the cemetery." And so she marched him down here. I always picture her having him by the ear and just dragging him down the road. They come right around this corner, Right over here is where they found the lifeless body of James lying on the ground. Now, being a single mom, she couldn't afford a proper burial for her son. She couldn't afford the plot. She couldn't afford the headstone, or the coffin, or the ceremony. So she did the only thing she could do. She went down to the local Catholic church, and she begged for help. Well, that Sunday, they took up a lot of donations, especially for James and his family. And the people of St. Augustine stood up for him. They donated enough money not to just pay for his funeral and his entire burial cost. They donated enough money for 2 extra plots. One for Stephen, and then one for his mom. Well, if you guys look, right over here, you'll see one little headstone, all by itself. That's the final resting place of James P. Morgan. Now, the reason there's nobody anywhere near him, you notice his mom and his brother aren't there, is because in 1891, the Catholic Church was brought up on charges of fraud. They had been selling multiple plots to different people, hoping nobody would find out. And this was proven to be fact in 1892. They were forced to stop burying people here altogether. So James was left alone. His mom and his brother were never reunited with him. And I can only imagine what they said to his mother. She started saving every nickel, dime, and penny she possibly could. And in the year 1900, her and Stephen moved to Austin, Texas. And that's where they're both buried to this very day. James has been alone ever since. Now, soon after they moved is when reports started coming in, constantly, about a little boy out here playing in the cemetery. He was hiding behind headstones. He was climbing trees. He likes to try to communicate with other children. James is one of these spirits. I don't believe he understands that he's gone. Now, the reason I believe in this so much is pretty simple. When I first started this job, I did a little bit of research on the story. I thought it was a great story. I was on the fence about it. I had a large group of people my first week doing this. I told them a little bit about James, and as soon as I was done talking about it, a little boy looked at me. This kid couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And he said, "Blanco, was James wearing a red shirt?" And I told him exactly like I'll tell you guys tonight. If you ask me a question and I don't know the answer to it, I'm not going to make something up. I'm not going to lie. I'm just going to tell you I don't know. So I told this little boy, I said, "Buddy, I have no idea." We continued the tour. Didn't think anything else up for the rest of the night. The next night, I had a great big group, about 30 people. And it was one of those special groups where everybody had been enjoying themselves all day. It took me 20 minutes to get them from the office to here. We come up here, and I hadn't said a word about James. Nothing about a kid. I hadn't even said welcome to the Talamato yet. And I look over, and there's this little girl pulling on her dad's shirt. He finally got impatient. He looked over at her and he said, "What? What do you want?" And she said, "Daddy, there's a little boy out there wearing a red shirt that wants to play with us." You cannot fake goosebumps. This freaks me out every time I talk about it. Because it is impossible that this kid had never been on the tour before, had no idea about the little boy, nothing, and knew that he was wearing a red shirt just like the kid the night before. So I dove in and I started doing research. In 1877, it was very common for little boys to wear red or pink shirts. It was also very common for little girls to wear blue. I had no idea that the color scheme had been flipped. And there was no way these children would have known that either. Now, since then, I've probably seen 4 or 5 dozen pictures of James. I have never had a personal encounter with him myself. He tends to, well, he doesn't really like guys a whole lot, and he prefers children. But I've seen a lot of pictures of this kid right up here in this tree. I've seen a lot of pictures of him back here behind the headstone, like he's just peeking around the corner, like he's playing hide and seek. So I truly do believe that James is here. Even though I've never seen him with my own 2 eyes, I am a believer in this one. Now the next story I have for you guys is something that I have seen I witnessed this about 2 years ago. And that is the spirit of Bishop Verreau. Bishop Verreau was the very first bishop in St. Augustine. He lived down at the Basilica for many, many years. And he had a perfect reputation. Not just here in Florida, but all over the South. He was well loved. He was a genuine good human being. Anytime he had the opportunity to help people, he would. It didn't matter if a hurricane hit in Louisiana. It didn't matter. He would get on his horse with as many supplies as he could possibly carry, and he would go and help. Making sure people had food, clothing, clean drinking water. He did this from Florida to Texas on multiple different occasions. This man was truly selfless. Well, he had gone and he had responded to a bad storm that had happened in Texas. And somewhere between there and here, he caught something. He got very, very sick. By the time he made it back to St. Augustine, he was near death. And within a couple of days, he passed away. Yeah, a little bit. Now, since he was so well loved all over the South, the Catholic Church decided they needed to postpone his funeral for 2 full weeks. They wanted to make sure people had time to get here to show respect. You know, they couldn't just call an Uber. They had to ride horses or walk. Now this happened late 1700s, early 1800s. They had no AC, they had no refrigeration. In fact, they weren't even using embalming fluid yet. Most of these burials out here are natural burials. Now that meant they had to get creative because Verreau died in June. You guys ever been here in June? Yeah, it's miserable, right? If you have not been here in June, let me give you some advice. Don't come here in June. July, August, or September for that matter. So they came up with a plan. Their plan was pretty simple. They packed the bishop's corpse in ice the best that they could. And they hired a man to construct a very large iron coffin with a thick pane of glass in the lid so people could view him at the funeral. Once this coffin was completed, they then packed it full of blocks of ice and sawdust, covered that up with a blanket, and they put Verreau in on top of it and sealed it shut. They put him in the coolest, darkest room they could possibly find, which would have been nothing more than taking him over here to Mojo's and closing the windows. And they checked on him every single day. The night before his funeral, they checked on him that last time. They went in, they looked through the glass, and Verreau looked good. Didn't look like he had decomposed much at all. Seemed like their plan was working great. They decided to transport him at that point. They took him out of that room and they took him straight down to the Basilica. They brought his coffin up to the very front. They got everything set up for the next day. All of his flower arrangements, everything. And then they went to bed. And the next morning, before the funeral, they opened the doors of the Basilica and there were thousands of people all over downtown. Here specifically for Verreau. I don't know if you've been to the Basilica yet or not. I am not a religious person myself, but if you have not been down there, go. It is spectacular. The place is beautiful. It makes you feel like you're about that big. Go check that one out. Now, they let as many people in as they possibly could. This funeral was standing room only. A lot of people had to wait out in the park or on the sidewalk. And those were the lucky ones. Now, the service started. The preacher's up in the front talking about all the beautiful things that Verreau had done in his life. And about halfway through the service, things kind of went sideways. That iron coffin started to make some really strange hissing noises. In fact, Ghostbuster, can you make me a strange hissing noise? It's like you were there. That's beautiful. Good job. So this coffin starts to hiss. Everybody in the church hears it. The preacher standing in front of the coffin, you know he had to hear it too. But the man was a pro. He didn't skip a beat. He kept going. A couple minutes later, the coffin starts making popping sounds. Can you make me a popping sound? Close enough, that'll work. So now this coffin's hissing and popping. Still, that preacher doesn't skip a beat. Keeps going. He keeps talking until right up to the point where, boom, the glass in that coffin erupted, completely exploded, and so did the bishop. I'm talking, man, there would have been bishop on your goggles, bishop on your hat, all in your hair. You would have been all over that beautiful sweatshirt you got. He was on the floor, he was on the walls, and he was in the pews. He was everywhere. Now the Catholics believe that if you are buried missing body parts that have not been blessed and sanctified, you don't get to go to heaven. And we're talking about a bishop. He was going to heaven one way or another. So the priests then locked the doors to the facility. They did not allow anybody to leave. And they started the cleanup process. The priests and the nuns went around picking little pieces of bishop off of everybody and everything they could, blessing it and sanctifying it as they went. Once they were confident that they had all the bishop back in the box, then they let people leave. From what I've read, it took about 4 hours to do this. Keep in mind, this is in a hot old church in July at this point. After they got him back in the box, they had it resealed. They had the glass fixed, and then they brought him here. And I assume they did it with extreme haste, because I know if I would have been part of this, I would have been ready to get this man in the ground. So they rushed down here, and they took his coffin straight back there to that crypt, and they started digging. Within a couple of minutes, they found another body. This was another Catholic priest. He had been here 20 years earlier. He was from Puerto Rico. He had been here on a mission, and just like Barreau, he'd gotten sick and died. Now, did you guys ever play the Gorka Trail growing up?
Oh, yes.
I'm going to throw that out there real quick. People got sick and died all the time. You're going to see a pattern tonight. Well, once they find this body, they had to make a pretty serious decision. They had a priest in the ground, and they had a bishop in the box. They could have buried these men side by side. They could have given this other priest a new grave. They could have given Barreau his own grave. They had options. What they decided to do instead was take this other man out of his grave, put him in a bag, and set him off in the corner of the crypt. See, they were only supposed to be holding on to this body temporarily anyway. The people of Puerto Rico were supposed to have come up and claimed him. But in this time period, that just wasn't possible. The Spanish and the British were fighting all up and down the East Coast, all the way down into the islands. And we had a lot of pirates as well. So they couldn't risk a ship for one lonely priest. So he sat in the corner of that crypt for about 40 years. 40 years later, the people of Puerto Rico sent notice. They were finally on their way to claim the body of the priest that they had recently named a saint. Yeah, a saint. Now, 40 years later, there weren't a lot of people that were alive that remembered what had happened at Barreau's funeral. There wasn't a lot of people that knew what happened at his burial. But there was one little old nun. She had been present at both. She actually helped with the cleanup process there at the basilica. And now she was a record keeper. So when the good people of Puerto Rico showed up to reclaim this body, she stopped them before they could start digging. She told them, "No, hon, don't bother digging. That's not where he's at anymore." She said, "The man you're looking for is right over there in the corner." Now, like I said earlier, I'm not going to sugarcoat much. The people of Puerto Rico were pissed. And they should have been. Had every right to be. But to make a long story a little bit shorter, they retrieved his body, they took him home, and they gave him the proper burial that he deserved. And that's where he rests to this day. Now, Barreau, he got to stay out there until about 1975. Now, in 1975, we had a very large group of locals. We're curious to find out if the legend of the exploding bishop was true or not. Which, honestly, I mean, you ever heard of an exploding bishop before?
No.
Me neither until I started doing this. So they started petitioning the local Catholic Church. They wanted permission to exhume the body. They wanted to find out once and for all. And of course, they got turned down quite a few times before the Catholics finally gave them the approval they were looking for. Not real sure how that happened. So the day that Moreau was exhumed, the Catholics were expecting a very large turnout. They thought there was going to be historians and archaeologists and locals and other members of the Catholic Church here. What they ended up with was a couple of priests, about 6 locals, and 3 men in an F-250. Exactly what they got. These men in that pickup pulled up right outside the gates. They pulled shovels out of their truck, and they went out there, and the doors were unlocked, and they started digging. They dug for a little while until they finally hit that ancient old iron coffin. They cleared out all the way around it. They cleared off the top, and they realized almost instantly there's no way the 3 of them were going to get this thing out of the hole by themselves. So instead of coming out, they're like, hey, can you guys, give us a hand? Let's get this thing out of the ground. Instead of wrenching a winch or a pulley or 100 other things they could have done in 1975, they decided instead to turn this into a Florida Man story. You guys know who Florida Man is? No?
Yeah.
If you do not know who Florida Man is, you can thank me later. Go on YouTube and just put in Florida Man. It is hours and hours of entertainment. It's amazing. What these men decided to do is they took that F-250 and they backed straight up to the doors of the crypt. They put tow straps around that ancient iron coffin, and they tried to yank Moreau out of his grave. This did not work. Not because it was a Ford, just because it was a terrible idea. When they gave it a little bit of gas and that Ford started moving forward a little bit, the tow strap slipped. It pitched the coffin up at an angle about like that, and the lid came completely off. So they stopped what they were doing. They got out of their truck. They went around the back to inspect the damage. And when they did, they found out a couple of very, very important things. Number one, yes, the legend was true. Moreau was in pieces. The next thing they learned was a little something about ancient craftsmanship. Back in the day, when they built stuff, they took pride in it. They wanted to do the best job they could, and they intended it to last. Moreau had been in the ground for well over 100 years at this point. And all the reports said the same thing. There was still meat on his bones. And there was this black gelatinous goo all over the inside of this old coffin. I have personally read reports that said you could smell it from here to St. George Street. So these men got in their truck and they drove off and left the Catholics to deal with it. Wasn't much they could do as far as the law goes, because they signed the documents and said that they could do this. It just went silent. At this point, they decided there had to be something they can do to make it right with Moreau. So they did what they should have done in the very beginning. They gave Moreau his very own grave. To this day, that right there, that's the final resting place of the dead. They put him in a new coffin, and they filled that coffin full of concrete. That way he will never be disturbed again. Now, it wasn't long after this ordeal. People started seeing a shadow walker, or sometimes even an apparition, that forms right there in front of those doors. They say it stands there for a second, and then it starts to walk. This spirit will walk from those doors all the way over to Moreau's grave. It'll stand right there behind the bust. Look down. It stands there. And without warning, it does an about face. It turns around extremely fast. And it starts going straight back through those doors again. Now, about 2 years ago, I wasn't doing ghost tours yet. I've been doing history tours in the city for almost 10 years now. But I was taking a break. I was working for Old Town Trolley at this point. I was one of their ticket salesmen. I'm sure you've seen these poor people stuck in boxes all over town, right? I was one of those guys. So please, personal favor to me, be nice to them. I know these people, and every one of them are about ready to snap. So just be nice. Now, this particular night, I was working in the parking lot right over here behind Potter's. And it was a slow night. I was bored, and I decided to do what I do best, which, well, quite simply is slacking off. That's my great talent. So I locked the doors to my booth. I walked right back here. There's actually an elevated platform on the other side of the fence. Gives you a great view of the cemetery. I'm up there smoking a cigarette, staring out the cemetery. And I saw a shadow form right there in front of those doors. Now, being a somewhat reasonable adult, first thing I thought, somebody in the cemetery that shouldn't. I stopped, I looked around, and it was empty. There was nobody out there. And then I had a moment of realization. The way those lights are set up, you can't cast a shadow against that door anyways. So I turned around and looked again. And that shadow that I had seen was on the move. I stood there and watched as it walked up to the backside of Barreau's grave. Stood there for a moment looking down, turned around real fast, and started heading back towards the crypt. And that moment, I did the exact same thing. I turned around real quick, and I started heading straight back to my booth, where I grabbed my belongings, I locked the door, I jumped in my car, and I went straight home. I was done for the night. I was truly spooked over this. Now, the next morning, I showed up for work. And of course, the first thing out of my boss's mouth was, "Why'd you leave an hour early last night?" And me, I've always been a little bit of a smart ass, a little bit brutally honest at times. I straight up told him, "Look, man, I think I saw a ghost. It scared me. I got in my car and I went home." So guess what Old Town Trolley did for me? They sent me down for drug testing immediately. And it was in that moment I started doing walking ghost tours. So I'm going to step out of the way real quick, let you guys take a couple of window here, where it looks like there's a lady walking around in there wearing Victorian clothing. There's never anybody up there at night, period, ever. I've seen 5 or 6 of these pictures in the last couple of months. So if you guys want to take a couple of pictures here, that would be great. I've got no backstory on this woman whatsoever. About the old drugstore. We do believe that Chief Talamato himself is buried underneath this building. The reason we believe this is because many, many years ago, they were having some bad plumbing issues. One of those ancient city, ancient pipes kind of a deal. They hired a plumbing company to come out, and they had to remove a very large section of the floor so they could get in there and find the problem. As they're digging around, they start finding chunks. That is the only hecklers that I accept right there. Those guys are lifesavers. I even tease the cops when they give me help. But they started finding chunks of an old grave marker as they're digging around. As they're finding these pieces, they're passing it up out of the hole and in to the pharmacy. They put all those pieces back together, and on this grave marker was Chief Talamato's name. Well, the owner, he kind of freaked out a little bit. He didn't want this under his building. So he took all of those fragments, he tossed them in a bucket, and he gave them to a friend and told him to dispose of it. Well, they fixed the plumbing and they fixed the floor. And the next time the pharmacist showed up to report for work, he unlocked the doors and walked in. And what he found was every bottle of medicine in that entire building had been smashed in the floor directly above where that grave marker had been located. So as you can imagine, that guy was pretty spooked. He locked the doors, he went straight to his boss's house and told him what had happened. The boss came down and see it for himself. And then he decided he needed to get that grave marker back. So he got a hold of his friend and asked him, "Hey, did you dispose of that bucket?" Luckily, his friend had not. So they reassembled that gravestone yet again. And to this day, it is on display inside that building. You guys need to go check that one out. Now the pharmacy section is free, which is my favorite price for anything around here. If you get bored, go in there and check out the pharmacy. Take your time. Look and see what people used to call medicine that we call felonies. It's amazing stuff. Apparently, if you mix grain alcohol with opium and cocaine, it cures everything. If you've got a headache, have a little sip of this. If your kid has colic, a little bit of that. It's also probably why people didn't live much past 40 in those days. But definitely go check that place out. And if you want to hear something really spooky, ask the old man behind the counter about the syphilis treatments. That doesn't creep you out, you're made sorry. If you are not a Catholic, you were not allowed to be buried within the city limits. That was just how it was. So this cemetery was constructed just outside the city walls. And this one is primarily going to be Protestants. There's a little bit of everybody out here. This was also the public cemetery. It was cheaper to get buried here than it was at the Talamata. Now today, we are left with 93 headstones here. And there are a lot more bodies out there than that. And a big reason for that being, well, besides people have been stealing the headstones for the last couple of hundred years, has to do with yellow fever. Yellow fever hit in 1821, and it wiped out 1/3 of St. Augustine's population incredibly fast. People were dying so quickly, they didn't have time to give everybody a proper burial. And just like James's family, not everybody could afford it, especially if you've got 2 or 3 people dying in your family at the same time. So a lot of these graves here, and a lot of them over at Talamata as well, will have 2, sometimes even 3 bodies per grave. Now, engraving a headstone was also very expensive. And so a lot of times, the only person that would get their name on that headstone was either the head of the household, if they passed, or the last person that was put in the hole. There are a lot of forgotten people in this city. People that died without a name and will never be remembered. And I feel that adds to a lot of the activity here. Here at the Huguenot, we catch a lot of orbs. We catch a lot of weird things like faces in the trees. A lot of shadows moving around that just should not be moving. Now, as far as the orbs go, it didn't always used to be this way. This has been a recent event. See, in 2016, we got hit by a massive, massive hurricane. Hurricane Matthew. I don't know if you guys remember that one. But when the surge waters came in, the water was this deep right here where we're standing. Torrential downpours, 100-mile-an-hour winds. It decimated our city. It turned this lovely place into a third world country for about 2 weeks. No power, no nothing. Well, during the storm, it took out a very large oak tree. It used to sit right over in this area here. When that tree came down, it came straight back this way. It took out a lot of the headstones. It took out the fence. And since the ground was so waterlogged, the roots of this tree had absolutely nothing to hold on to. The roots came up as well, 25 feet in the air. And as the rain came down, it started to wash the roots clean. In the roots were human remains. Lots of them. Talking skulls, torsos, arms, legs, chunks of old coffins, pieces of old headstones, you name it. The whole 9 yards. And it displayed it straight towards the front of the cemetery and the main drag of the city. Now, the city of St. Augustine, I'm going to give them some credit on this. Matthew was still raging on, and they sent a crew out here to cut that tree up and get rid of it. And of course, the last thing they wanted, the people driving by, is seeing human remains hanging from roots in a tree. Now, unfortunately, I have no idea what they did with these bodies. I know they got rid of the tree. had to do something with the remains. So I went down to city council and I asked, hey, what did you guys do with the remains that were in that tree? The same answer they give me every single time I have a question. You know, we don't know. Just don't talk about it on your tours. Well, here I am talking about it on my tours. The big reason for that being is I'm kind of old school. I don't believe history belongs to you. I don't think it belongs to you or even you guys. It belongs to all of us. It's not supposed to be pretty. You're supposed to learn from it. And if history offends you, that's even better. Be offended. Don't allow it to happen again. Now, I've talked to people like Miss Sadie, who's been doing this, like I said, for 25 years. I've talked to another good friend of mine, Dion. If you guys look up ghost stories or ghost tours in St. Augustine on YouTube, you will be flooded with Dion. He's been doing this for 30-something years now. When I interviewed those guys about the orbs around this area, they both told me the exact same thing. It's always been an active spot. It's nowhere near what it is today. I said, once that tree came down, this place just erupted with activity. This is a spot where I do this 4 or 5 nights a week. Probably twice a week we get some people that get some really wild pictures out of this. In fact, last night I had a gentleman get a picture I could not explain at all. And I'm going to show that to you guys here in just a little bit. But I want you to go ahead and take some photos. There are enough stories in this particular spot. We can spend the rest of the night standing right here. So we got a lot of really cool, the whole spectrum out here. This is the most active place in the entire city. It's definitely on the top 10 list of most haunted places in the state of Florida and possibly on the entire East Coast. I'm looking for one picture there. This is my favorite part of the tour. Because I get to officially welcome you guys to the Castillo de San Marcos, or the Castle of St. Mark. This is the oldest masonry fort anywhere in North America. And before this beauty stood here, there were 9 other forts right here in this general vicinity. All 9 of these forts were made out of wood, and every single one of them were burnt to the ground, either by pirates or by the British. After the 9th one was burnt down, the Spanish were about sick of it. See, they had a lot of treasure ships coming through here. St. Augustine needed to be protected. So the king ordered the Castillo to be built. Now, instead of wood, this time they used coquina, which is the most abundant stone in this area. It's a shell stone. It was mined off of Anastasia Island, right there under Anastasia State Park. And you guys could actually go and visit the site if you wanted to. It was taken out of the ground and cut into blocks, and then they shipped it over here. This fort took 23 years to construct, and in 1695, construction was completed. And this place was beautiful. It looked a lot different than it looks today. You notice these white spots on the walls. It had an extra coating. This was the closest thing I could really compare it to would be like a modern day stucco. And the Spanish would have painted this entire place a bright white, all except for the towers. The towers they painted a bright red. This place was beautiful. I read reports from sailors that stated when they came into the inlet, and the entrance to the Atlantic is right there. Didn't matter if they were coming from the north or from the south, when they made that turn and they started heading towards St. Augustine, this fort looked like it glowed, like it was almost supernatural. Now, after its construction was completed, this thing has been attacked 23 different times. Never once has it been defeated in battle. So not only is it the oldest masonry fort anywhere in North America, it's also undefeated. This is a very, very special place. I've been down here hundreds of times, and I feel privileged every time I get to stand right here and introduce it to people. Now we're going to start heading over to the east side. Like I said before, this isn't the spot that I'm a big fan of, but this is what it looked like. Check this out. Because this is the moat area, all right here. They would use it for livestock and supplies. This is what the walls would have looked like. This thing was beautiful. And out today, it looks like this. I don't know why they haven't restored it. They're just allowing it to rot, and I don't like it, and I don't understand it. So let's head over. Quite simply, not enough time in the day or night to go over all the different reports that have happened here. So that's why I've developed the tour the way I have. Some of the most common things that have been reported here are things like Spanish soldiers patrolling around the fort. Sometimes it'll be one or two spirits. Other times it's been reported to be entire regiments. There have been a lot of reports of soldiers patrolling the eastern side of the fort. One in particular we believe to be a Spanish watchman from about between 1740 and 1760. We don't know what his name is. The only reason we have even a rough estimate of the date that he was here is by his attire. He wears a frock coat and a tricorn hat, and that dates it pretty close. Now this is another one of those spirits, I believe, that doesn't know that he's gone. I think he was a Spanish watchman. I think his whole purpose was to watch for ships coming in from the Atlantic. I truly believe that he died here, and it happened quickly. That's why to this day he still patrols these walls. This is something I have seen with my own two eyes. Probably about 5 or 6 different times. But when I'm down here, I have a lot of trouble keeping my eyes off of the tops of these walls, because I always feel like we're being watched. I've never had a bad vibe from him, but just the fact that he's there really gets me on edge sometimes. Now, people have also reported some pretty crazy stuff just in the downtown area in general and over on the island. People have said that they have heard phantom cannon fire in the middle of the night, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Cannon will go off here at the Castillo. This has been going on for hundreds of years. And as fun as it would be to fire off a cannon here at the fort at 3 o'clock in the morning, they just don't do it. I've also heard this. I moved here about 12 years ago. I was living on the island. I was working at the Mellow Mushroom. I had to work very, very late one night, and I didn't get home until 2:30 or 3 o'clock. As I'm unlocking my front door to my little studio apartment, I heard the cannons go off here at the Castillo. You've been around the area quite a bit. You know what those cannons sound like.
And feel like.
Yeah, there's no mistaking it. It's not like, oh, somebody's firing a gun or it was a backfire of a car. You know it's the Castillo. You know it's these cannons. I've got dozens of friends that are locals. They grew up here, and to them it's not even that big of a deal. It's just something that happens. Now, the one thing that really freaks me out about this area is I've heard of a lot of people say that they've heard gunshots while down here at night. And the people that I have talked to say it sounds like a musket going off from about me to you. And when they look around, there's absolutely nobody. It truly freaks people out. They'll run out of here. They'll go to the parking lot. They'll call the cops. The cops don't hesitate. They come down here and they do their little investigation. Never once have they found any evidence of anybody down here shooting, at least not recent. Now, this is the reason I bring you here tonight. At the beginning of my tour, I asked everybody to go stand against the wall, right? Not going to do that to you here, but I do want you to follow me.
Bro, I know what that is.
Anybody tell me what this is?
Firing range.
That's exactly what it is. This is the execution wall. This had been in use for hundreds of years. From the time the Castillo was completed to the time that it was retired, this was the spot you were going to get shot. And as far as I can tell, there's no accurate record of how many people died here. I've read 250. That was the smallest number I've seen. The largest number I've seen was about 1,200. Fact of the matter is, that number is lost to time. We're never truly going to know how many people died here or how much blood was spilled right there at the bottom of these walls. Now, a lot of times, same thing went for the British. If they ordered you to be executed, a lot of times, unless you were a high-ranking officer or somebody of importance, they did not deem you worthy to be remembered. So they wouldn't even taken a record of it. In fact, a lot of times they would shoot people right here, they would drag them over, and they'd toss them over the seawall into the ocean. Let the crabs and the fish and the sharks have at it. This is by far the darkest place I've ever been in St. Augustine. I've had a lot of crazy things happen down here to me and to people on my tours. People have reported the feeling of a static electricity coming through the wall. There's no power on the other side of this wall. There's no reason for that. People have experienced shortness of breath, numbing in their extremities, the smell of gunpowder, the smell of smoke, the smell of sulfur. They've also, a lot of people have experienced an incredibly heavy feeling of dread as they're over there at the wall. Also, one other thing that's a little bit interesting, most of the time, if you put your finger in one of those holes, it's warmer inside the wall than it is on the outside. Even during the summer, during the winter, it doesn't matter what time of year, it's kind of weird. Now, what I've experienced against this wall, and a lot of other people have also experienced, is the unmistakable taste of blood. I'm not talking like you accidentally bit the inside of your lip or you've got bleeding gums or anything like that. It's like you took a full shot and you almost choke on it. The last time I leaned against this wall, that is exactly what happened to me. And that was about 6 months ago. We were having a very active night. We were getting a lot of cool readings, a lot of good pictures, and I decided to come back after the tour. Because a lot of times, if we're having an active night, I'll come back, especially if I don't have to work the next morning. I came down here with my cameras. I came down with my laser grids, my dowsing rods, my EMF detectors, everything. I wanted to check it out. Because that night, somebody had gone into a full-on panic attack after leaning against that wall, and I had to have an ambulance come down here. So when I do a paranormal investigation, I don't do it like ghost hunters, like Zach. If I see something, I stick it out. That's what I'm there for. I also do all my investigations barefoot. I don't want something blocking the energy. If there's something there, I want to feel it. So I went over, I leaned against that wall, I leaned my head back and I closed my eyes. And within just a couple of seconds, I started choking. I felt like I was choking on blood. I come away from the wall coughing, and I got right about here, and the feeling went away. It truly spooked me. I gathered up my stuff, and I called it a night at that point. I had everything I needed to know. Since then, I have not leaned up against this wall. Now, if you guys want to, feel free. But I feel that I have warned you enough about this. If this is something you want to experience, go right ahead. And also, at this point in the tour, I'd like to turn you guys loose around here. Walk around. Take some pictures of the Castillo. Take some pictures of the little cannonball furnace as well. There's been a lot of reports and a lot of pictures of fire and smoke coming out of that thing. It hasn't been torched off in decades. There's no reason for it. Now, something else you might have noticed when I first came up here, I shined my light in there and looked around. Because people were getting a lot of pictures of eyes inside the furnace.
What was burned there?
Oh, that was for cannonballs. They would heat up cannonballs to right around 1,000 degrees, and then there'd be men with tongs on this side. They'd grab a hold of cannonballs, they'd rush over and load them in the cannons, and then fire them at the old wooden ships. So anything they hit would catch on fire. Most of the time it wouldn't destroy a ship, but if you're on a wooden boat and it's on fire, you're going to stop what you're doing and put the fire out. That gave them a lot more time to attack. But I did some research and I couldn't find any evidence of anybody ever being cremated in there or any other reason for eyes to be inside. But I've seen a lot of pictures of it. So one night I'm down here standing in front of the furnace talking to my people, and an incredibly angry raccoon come flying at it. Scared the hell out of me. I made noises a 280-pound man should never make. Luckily, there was a couple other big guys like yourself on the tour that night, and they made almost the exact same sound. So the whole once bit, twice shy thing, I don't mess with it. Every time I come down here, I look at it. But yeah, go ahead and walk around, take some pictures, and then after that, we'll head back to town. I will be standing over here away from the wall. I don't think so. No, that looks like the energy. Yeah, this is a bug. It's one single line, and then you broke up. That's energy. Yeah, that's electromagnetic. That's pretty cool. It's a good picture. I still think our rangers need to turn the place. No? All right, good. You might enjoy this. If I could direct your attention to this big building right there in the center of town, the one with the big light on it, that's the Treasury. That's our old bank. Now, back in the early 1900s, that's where everybody would have kept their money. Everybody from Henry Flagler to the common person. And that bank had a horrible reputation for being corrupt. Imagine that, right? So in about, I don't know, 1924, when most banks would have only loaned out about 20% of their holdings, this bank did something unprecedented. They loaned out 70% of all of their holdings in one day. The day before the stock market crashed and put our country into the Great Depression. So it's like they knew something. All of everybody's connections, they decided to just liquidate. Now the next day, once everybody found out that the stock market crashed, as you can imagine, what would you do? You're going to the bank. You want to get your money out. It went real smooth for about a half an hour. And then the bank ran out of money. That left hundreds of people incredibly angry. They lost all their money that they had. And for a lot of people, that was all they had. So they decided to riot. Their mission became to get their hands on that bank manager, and their plan was they were going to beat him about half to death, and then they were going to drag him across the street and have a good old-fashioned hanging right there in Constitution Park. This man did not want to get lynched. He ran around inside that bank looking for an exit. He went to the back door, he opened it up, and there were about 300 people standing there. He slammed the door and he locked it. And then he decided to go for a nice long walk up some stairs. Now, he kept going up the stairs until he made it to the roof, where I assume he took a couple of really deep breaths. Because I know if I climb that many flights of stairs, I'm going to be winded. He got up there, took a couple of deep breaths, and then took off running. He ran and he dove off of the southwest corner of that building. His body came down on the sidewalk right there on Cathedral Street. Just splat. They could have cleaned him up with a mop and a bucket. Apparently, that's the best way to stop a riot. Because as soon as his body hit the ground, people started going home. They were done with it. And not long after that, the Depression really started to take hold. People were losing their jobs. They were having trouble feeding their families. And the Catholic Church stepped up to the plate. they went ahead and they opened the very first soup kitchen anywhere in the state of Florida. And they started feeding thousands of people right there in Constitution Park, under that beautiful little pavilion area that used to be the old slave market. They're feeding people every day. And one day, one of the local priests come walking out the doors of the basilica with an armful of bread, heading down towards the soup kitchen. When he saw movement, top of that building, he stopped, looked up, just in time to see a dark figure come off the top of it. He stood there like any of us would. You see something like that, you're going to stop and watch. He stopped and he watched this dark figure start to fall. It fell about 3/4 of the way down the side of that building and completely disappeared. And that was the first of many reports of that banking. Now, I've probably read 25 or 30 different reports, and the consistency on this one is incredible. There's very little variance in any of the stories. It's always a dark figure coming off of the southwest corner, falling 3/4 of the way down, and then boom, gone. The other cool thing about this is all the reports happen during the middle of the day, during banker's hours. So do yourselves a favor, do me a favor. Next time you guys are out walking around the south side of town just exploring, stop for a minute. Look up at the side of that building. And if you're really, really lucky, you might get to see a banker jump. Now keep something else in mind though. If you're right there in front of the basilica and you see a dark figure come off the top of that building, pay a lot of attention how far it falls. Because if it goes past that 3/4 of the way mark, we're talking about two completely different people, and you might want to move. All right, let's head back to camp. There's nothing special about it, no supernatural, no ghost stories, but I think it's a little bit scarier than that. Those cracks are due to greed, which in my opinion is quite possibly the nastiest thing we could ever experience in our lives. See, at one point our government decided that this sport wasn't bringing enough revenue. It wasn't getting enough tourist money. So they decided to wall off the southeast and northeast corners of the port and fill the moat full of water. This was never designed for that. Like you showed back there in the picture, they would have had livestock and supplies. This was a dry moat. Well, not long after they did that, the Castillo started crumbling on this side. And over the years, it has just gotten worse. They haven't repaired it, they've done nothing to it. Now the reason this is so spooky to me is you figure the British had been trying to destroy this fort or conquer it for hundreds of years, using cannonballs and fire and whatever weaponry they could possibly throw at this place. They have never, in hundreds of years, done nearly as much damage as our government's greed has done. That's why this right here spooks me more than anything else. You guys want to see some more greed? If you don't believe this one, next time you get paid, look at your paycheck. It also gives me an opportunity to do this. Where are my non-believers at? This is my last chance to prove something to you guys. Cool, everybody's been converted. You have to come up here, let me show you something. Everybody, come here. This is amazing. This works probably 60% of the time. All right, y'all look in here. Y'all see that? Check it out. See that? There's more spirits than any one of us could possibly handle. There you go. Have that one. Before they go back out on the stage. It also helps me to kind of shake the negativity off from a lot of the stories and a lot of the places we've gone tonight. And with that being said, guys, I want to take this moment just to thank each and every one of you. Thank you for coming out and taking my tour. I do this because, well, it's my passion. I love it. I work a full-time job, and then I come and do this for you guys tonight. So thank you very, very much. Now, if you enjoyed the tour, there's a couple of things you can do for me. Probably the most important thing is going to be reviews. If you enjoyed the tour, go wherever you bought your tickets from, Google or TripAdvisor, any of them. And leave me a 5-star review. My name is Blanco. Leave a brief description, what you enjoyed about the tour, what you learned on it, or whatever you would like. And that goes for any other tour guide you encounter out here on the streets.